pay attention, because what we are about to discuss isn't casual office gossip, and it isn't a product of your paranoia, exaggeration, or emotional distortion. What has been unfolding behind your back, the subtle shifts in the room when you enter, the strange discrepancies in information, the sudden coldness from people who were friendly yesterday, wasn't a series of random, harmless coincidences. It was patterned behavior, a calculated sequence of quiet conversations meant to reshape the perception of your character, selective truths designed to bend reality, and repeated commentary aimed at weakening your social or professional position without the risk of a direct confrontation. Behavioral psychology recognizes this as indirect hostility, a predatory social tactic that thrives exclusively when the target remains unaware, doubting their own intuition while the foundation of their reputation is systematically dismantled. That phase of your ignorance ends right now. This matters deeply because you need to understand that backbiting is never actually about you as a person. It's about the raw mechanics of control and the desperate need for social leverage. When an individual lacks the internal capacity or the moral courage to challenge you openly, they pivot to a covert theater of war, attempting to influence how the world sees you so they can manage you through the lens of others. They use the weapons of repetition, emotional framing, and strategic omissions to guide everyone else to a conclusion that they themselves never have to appear responsible for. In the early stages of this dynamic, you likely did what every high-functioning, empathetic person does. You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You assumed there was a simple misunderstanding, and you leaned toward goodwill, believing that people are generally as honest as you are. But patterns do not lie, and consistency reveals intent far more accurately than any apology, charm, or surface-level friendliness ever could. What is shifting in this very moment is your level of awareness. You are beginning to notice the jagged edges in their communication, the subtle changes in vocal tone, and the altered information circulating in your circle that could only have originated in a private, high-context conversation. This isn't just intuition without evidence. This is your brain's cognitive pattern recognition, firing at full capacity, because the structure of the deception has become too large to hide. Once you see the architectural layout of the manipulation, the confusion that has been draining your energy dissolves, and that newfound clarity becomes your primary leverage. From this point forward, the entire dynamic reverses. Education replaces your instinctual reaction, and the power balance flips. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop oversharing your vulnerabilities with those who use them as ammunition. You start observing the mechanics of the room with the cold detachment of a scientist. Access to your life becomes selective, and your boundaries become non-negotiable. Research consistently shows that covertly aggressive individuals lose their influence the moment they are deprived of emotional data and physical proximity. Their methods require access to your reactions to function. By creating distance, you don't just protect yourself, you effectively neutralize them. In this video, we are going to deconstruct the exact psychological profile of the backbiter, why they chose you as their target, and the three-step information blackout strategy that forces a manipulator to expose themselves. Because the truth is, they aren't afraid of you. They are afraid of the version of you that finally knows exactly what they're doing. Most people imagine harm as loud. Arguments, insults, confrontations, visible conflict. But social psychology shows the opposite, especially in adult environments like workplaces, communities, and social networks. Harm is usually indirect, subtle, and deniable. Backbiting exists because it allows people to influence outcomes without taking responsibility. It's low-risk, high-impact behavior. Instead of confronting you, someone can quietly shape how others interpret you, and the damage occurs without a visible source. This is known as relational aggression. Unlike physical or verbal aggression, it works by manipulating relationships, trust, and perception. When someone speaks negatively about you in your absence, they aren't simply venting, they are attempting to control the narrative. Over time, repeated small distortions can outweigh direct evidence, especially in group environments where people rely heavily on secondhand information. What makes this form of harm especially dangerous is that it targets your reputation rather than your behavior. You may continue acting ethically, competently, and consistently, while the social environment around you quietly shifts. By the time you realize something is off, decisions may already have been influenced. Understanding this isn't about becoming suspicious. It's about recognizing that silence doesn't mean safety and friendliness, doesn't automatically mean goodwill. Backbiting isn't random. In most cases, it's status regulation behavior. Social hierarchy research shows that when individuals feel threatened by someone's competence, independence, confidence, visibility, or emotional stability, they often respond indirectly. Instead of improving themselves or competing openly, they try to lower the perceived value of the other person. This is why backbiting often increases when you grow, not when you struggle. Promotions, recognition, confidence, autonomy, or simply becoming harder to control can trigger it. The behavior becomes a way to rebalance status without confrontation. Subtly questioning your intentions, exaggerating your mistakes, or framing you as difficult, unreliable, or unsafe. This reframing protects their own standing. Understanding this shifts how you interpret what happened. It stops being personal in the emotional sense and becomes predictable in the behavioral sense. That doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains it. And when you see backbiting as a status maneuver rather than a character judgment, you're less likely to react impulsively and more likely to respond strategically. Information distortion rarely starts with outright lies. It usually begins with selective truth. A detail gets removed, a tone gets added, a motive gets assumed. They said this slowly becomes, they always say things like this. Over time, these micro-shifts accumulate. Social psychology calls this narrative drift, where repeated retellings slowly move further from the original event. Because humans rely heavily on social proof, listeners often accept these altered versions without verification. They assume that concern, frustration, or emotional delivery must be grounded in reality. The more emotionally charged the story, the more believable it feels. This is how reputations are reshaped quietly, without a single dramatic moment. And once a distorted narrative spreads, correcting it directly becomes extremely difficult. Defending yourself can look reactive or defensive, which sometimes reinforces the story itself. That's why reputation management isn't about constant explanation. It's about consistency, boundaries, controlled access, and long-term behavioral alignment. A common mistake is believing that truth automatically corrects distortion. In reality, truth requires structure and time to surface, and silence often does more work than defense. Many people assume they were targeted because they were naive, too kind, too trusting, or not careful enough. While boundaries do matter, research on social threat perception shows something counterintuitive. People are more likely to undermine those they see as capable, not weak. Independence, competence, authenticity, unpredictability, or simply not needing approval can register as threats in insecure environments. Threat perception doesn't require wrongdoing. Sometimes not participating in politics, not aligning with expectations, or not centering someone else's emotional needs is enough. For individuals who rely on validation, control, or hierarchy, your independence destabilizes their internal equilibrium. Backbiting becomes a way to restore psychological balance. This reframing is essential for recovery. It prevents you from internalizing blame that doesn't belong to you. You can still refine boundaries, communication, and discretion without accepting the false narrative that your character caused their behavior. That distinction preserves self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of intelligent forward movement. Insecurity doesn't always look like low confidence. Often it hides behind charm, competence, authority, or likability. Psychological research shows that insecure individuals are more likely to engage in indirect aggression because it allows them to avoid exposure. Open conflict risks failure. Indirect harm preserves control without accountability. These individuals are often hypersensitive to comparison and status cues. They monitor how others are perceived and react strongly to anything that threatens their self-image. Instead of addressing their discomfort internally, they externalize it by undermining someone else. Backbiting becomes a coping mechanism, a way to discharge anxiety while maintaining a socially acceptable appearance. Recognizing this pattern isn't about diagnosing others. It's about detaching emotionally. When you understand that the behavior is driven by internal instability, it loses its power to define you. You stop seeking fairness from people who are not operating from fairness in the first place. That realization alone creates a shift toward calm disengagement. Long before you can point to a specific incident, your body often reacts. A change in tone, a shift in energy, a subtle coldness in conversations. These signals register before conscious thought. Neuroscience explains this through pattern recognition. Your brain constantly scans for inconsistencies between words and behavior, even when you're not actively analyzing them. This isn't mystical intuition, it's data processing. When someone's friendliness no longer matches their micro-behaviors, eye contact, emotional congruence, or response timing, your nervous system detects the mismatch. That uneasy feeling isn't imagination. It's your brain flagging uncertainty. Studies show humans are remarkably accurate at detecting social threat before they can articulate it. The real problem isn't sensing it, it's dismissing it. Many people override early warnings to maintain harmony or avoid appearing suspicious. Over time, that self-doubt erodes confidence. Learning to respect these signals without overreacting becomes a skill. It allows you to adjust boundaries early, when the cost is low, instead of later when damage has already accumulated. When something feels wrong, confrontation seems logical. Address it directly. Clear the air. But research on conflict escalation shows that confronting indirect aggression often strengthens the aggressor's position. When someone operates covertly, they are already invested in plausible deniability. Confrontation gives them exactly what they need, an opportunity to reframe you as emotional, paranoid, reactive, or hostile. In many cases, confrontation doesn't stop the behavior. It changes its form. It becomes subtler, more strategic, harder to trace. The person may apologize superficially while continuing through others. This creates confusion and self-doubt, which is often the unspoken objective. This doesn't mean confrontation is always wrong. It means timing, leverage, and context matter. When power is asymmetrical or information is incomplete, restraint is often more effective. Strategic silence combined with behavioral change communicates boundaries without providing material to manipulate. Access is influence. Who can speak to you, about you, and for you, shapes outcomes more than most people realize. When someone repeatedly violates trust, continuing to grant them access isn't generosity, it's exposure. Behavioral science supports this. Proximity amplifies impact, both positive and negative. Removing someone socially, emotionally, or digitally is often framed as extreme, but in reality, it's risk reduction. You're not punishing them. You're removing variables that consistently produce negative outcomes. This is the same logic used in systems design, security, and organizational management. The relief many people feel after removal isn't emotional drama, it's cognitive. With fewer distortions entering your environment, your thinking becomes clearer. Decisions require less second-guessing. Energy once spent managing tension becomes available for growth. One of the hardest lessons for conscientious people is this: you don't need to be understood to be justified. Explanation feels fair, but in some situations, it becomes another opening for manipulation. Non-engagement isn't avoidance. It's a refusal to participate in dysfunctional dynamics. Research shows that when explanations are given to people who already disregard boundaries, they're often used as negotiation tools. The boundary becomes a debate instead of a decision. Quiet consistency, limited availability, neutral tone, and minimal response communicate finality without conflict. This protects both dignity and stability. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood as coldness or denial. In reality, it's a regulated response, not the absence of feeling. Psychological research distinguishes between suppression, which increases stress, and detachment, which allows emotion without letting it dictate behavior. The difference lies in awareness and control. When you detach properly, you still feel disappointment, anger, or hurt, but you don't act from those states. This creates space between stimulus and response. Over time, that space becomes protective. You stop replaying conversations. You stop seeking validation from people who don't operate in good faith. You stop anticipating reactions. Your attention returns to the present. This skill develops through repetition, not willpower. Each time you choose not to react, not to explain, not to chase clarity from the wrong people, your nervous system learns a new pattern. Calm becomes familiar. Stability becomes default. That shift is subtle, but it's transformative. Long-term exposure to indirect hostility has measurable physiological effects. Studies on chronic social stress show elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep, reduced cognitive flexibility, and emotional fatigue. Even when nothing overt happens, the anticipation of harm keeps the body in a low-grade threat state. This is why people feel exhausted without knowing why. The brain is constantly scanning tone, replaying conversations, interpreting microsignals. Over time, this vigilance drains energy, narrows creativity, weakens emotional resilience, and impairs decision-making. Removing the source allows the nervous system to recalibrate. Heart rate variability improves. Focus returns. Emotional responses become proportional. What feels like peace is often just the absence of unnecessary threat. This isn't abstract. It's biological. When you step back, distortions often decay on their own. Social psychology calls this the vacuum effect. Without your constant presence as a reference point, inconsistencies in narratives become visible. Claims stop aligning with reality. Over time, facts self-correct, as direct evidence emerges in ways manipulators can't prevent. This works because attention is finite. When you remove yourself from emotional cycles, space opens for others to process information objectively. If distorted assumptions about your intentions were circulating at work, their credibility weakens as results. Consistency and behavior contradict them. Silence doesn't weaken influence. It allows truth to surface without resistance. You conserve energy while stabilizing your reputation long-term. Space does work that defense never can. Manipulative individuals often operate on reinforcement loops. They rely on your attention, reactions, emotional responses, and engagement as fuel. When you remove that supply, their strategy collapses. Without reaction, there's no data to manipulate, no response to twist, no energy to amplify narratives. Studies on emotional contagion show that without the target's engagement, attempts at indirect control lose potency. The consequences unfold quietly but powerfully. The manipulator may escalate briefly, but each attempt becomes more visible and less effective, exposing patterns that were previously hidden. Over time, their behavior becomes predictable and containable. You regain authority over interactions, boundaries, and internal stability. Recognizing that your energy is currency changes everything. Withdrawal stops looking like avoidance and starts looking like strategic economy. You disrupt cycles designed to drain, destabilize, or dominate, and you reclaim focus, clarity, and agency. The psychological relief of removing toxic social exposure is mirrored biologically. Chronic covert hostility elevates cortisol, disrupts sleep, impairs focus, and destabilizes mood regulation. When you step away from individuals or environments that consistently activate stress responses, your nervous system recalibrates. Cortisol normalizes. Adrenaline spikes decrease. Neural pathways associated with vigilance and threat soften. This restoration has measurable cognitive effects. Decision-making sharpens. Emotional responses become proportional. Problem-solving improves. Even small daily improvements. Fewer intrusive thoughts, less irritability, deeper focus, compound over weeks, creating a sense of lightness, coherence, and internal steadiness. Your nervous system begins to reward the boundaries you've implemented. This isn't emotional avoidance. It's biological optimization. Ultimately, what you're experiencing isn't loss. It's correction. Correction of distorted access. Correction of misaligned proximity. Correction of emotional labor that was never reciprocated. You're not withdrawing because you're fragile. You're withdrawing because you're precise. You're not becoming colder. You're becoming cleaner. Cleaner boundaries. Cleaner energy. Cleaner relationships. You're no longer reacting inside systems designed to destabilize you. You're restructuring your environment so your nervous system, cognition, and self-trust can operate without distortion. That's not weakness. That's strategic intelligence. And once you understand that, you stop trying to survive dynamics that were never designed to support you, and start building conditions that actually do. If this message clarified something you've been living but couldn't name, don't let it pass silently. Hit like so this reaches the people who need it most. Subscribe if you want more content that sharpens your awareness instead of dulling it. And if you want to directly support the work we're doing here, super thanks helps us keep producing high-quality content like this consistently. Drop a comment with 11 if this resonated. I read everyone.